Fantastic. Thanks, Roger. Well, let's see. I have two places I wanted to start. As Roger said, the word photojournalism is credited to Cliff Edom, who was a photo engraver, worked for newspapers to try to figure out how to mechanically reproduce photos in newspapers more easily. It was a way to for newspapers to make more money. You know, you put pictures of people in the newspaper from that community, more copies of the newspaper are sold. And Cliff came from the Aurora Engraving Company to the School of Journalism, where he was both the engraver and an undergraduate student. And he got his degree in journalism here. And Cliff himself never really took credit for coining the word photojournalism, which of course is the idea of photography and journalism being one, that you're reporting with the visual. Cliff always credited the dean of the time and said, "Oh no, it wasn't my idea, it was the dean's," which of course made the dean, you know, that's the, you know, as you know, working with your own principal or superintendent, whenever you're able to pass off the credit for the really good things that happen, you're doing your job. And when I first came in here, it reminded me a little bit of a teacher's lounge. I taught, except for the spilled coffee on the tables and nobody picking up the trash, because of course there's no coffee in here and never any trash. I taught high school English for a couple of years, right out of college. From the University of Nebraska, English major, taught high school English for 2 years. And some of you may be from small schools. Any of you teach at the really small schools? Yeah. So when I was going for my job interview, the superintendent looked over and he said, "Oh, Mr. Rees, you played football." I said, "Well, I'm from Nebraska." "Yeah." He said, "Oh, then of course you can coach junior high football. And you're in English, you're teaching English, so of course you can teach our journalism class too." You know, some of you may have, and were you ever in a play? "Oh yes, I loved being in the chorus and playing in the orchestra." "Oh, well, we'd like you to direct the junior and senior class plays." I'm a little bit familiar with what happens to high school teachers, because it gets piled on. I mean, it's like, in some ways there's so much opportunity for you, but there's so many demands. And it's kind of a daunting equation. So I've got a lot of respect for you, and I'm really glad that RJI is doing this program to try to help equip all of us with a few things we might find useful in the classroom. So I was telling Roger, I was reviewing the program that you're on. You know, this is day 5, and some of you probably are counting them off and saying, "Oh my gosh." Maybe some of you, well, whatever. Anyway, it's nobody's gone missing yet, I guess. So I know that there's so much that, so many different presentations, and that you're kind of getting, things tend to get washed over a little bit. I'm going to try and be as specific as I can, and hope that some of it is useful to you. If you have any questions or you want to stop and talk about anything anywhere along the way, don't hesitate to say, "Whoop," and we'll do that. When I was teaching high school, I was chairman of the English department at Harvard, Nebraska High School, and so the town was so small that when I went home to work on lesson plans, or to grade or create a quiz, or to read the assignment that I was going to teach from the next day, you know how you kind of get so schooled out that you need to do something else. And so I would want to go up to the local cafe to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich for supper, and everybody say, "Oh, Mr. Rees, saw you, Mr. Rees. Hi, Mr. Rees." And then if I ever felt like I had to have a beer, then I'd say, "Oh, Mr. Rees, I saw you have a beer," you know. That I was really looking for a way in which to have some time to myself. And I had some buddies who were photographers, and who I picked up a used camera from one of them, and I started making pictures. I would go out at 11 or 12 at night in this small town, camera on a tripod, and experiment with the time exposures just with the moon or the street lights, and just to see what would happen. And then I come back and I take the film out and you know, bought the reels and the chemistry, and used the dining room of my little cottage to process film, and it worked. It was a great experiment. And then I would I was using 2 1/4, you know, the 120 Yashica D film. And so then I would put the negatives on a piece of paper, and then take the lampshade off a table lamp, and expose, you know, as 1001, 1002, and then put it in the developer. It worked. It was like magic. And for me, it was a real, it was a kind of a creative outlet at the time. And then it became something more than that, because I started taking pictures of people. And I always really liked to read, like to write. I liked, you know, living the land of ideas that I think a lot of us do. And so for me, it got to be a challenge about how I could communicate some of the things that I understood visually in a way that would be sort of immediate and visceral and kind of a complete communication from me to another person, things that I understood. I wanted them to understand too. And so I got intrigued with this idea of working with photography. Poynter Institute did some eye-track readership surveys, readership experiment some time ago, where they put little video cameras in glasses and then watched people as they read the newspaper in order to see what they processed, what they read. And so, maybe not unsurprisingly, it turned out that the visual things are what people really paid attention to. That those were the things that they spent time with. And that the part of the newspaper or the media that was really least paid attention to was the thing that often is considered to be the driving force of it. And so this is kind of a little bit of a disconnect. Not entirely, but because we know that there's tremendous investigative reporting that needs to be done, and people do read stories and so on, but it also seemed like there became some more of a, I guess, responsibility about what visuals could do, that visuals maybe perhaps were not doing. That rather than being eye candy, visual communication had an opportunity, and I would say a responsibility, to carry some meat, carry some content. So photography, you know, we know attracts attention, brings readers to stories. Photography is able to communicate different things than what text is able to communicate. We're able to show things. We're able to help people experience the same things that the people in the photograph are experiencing, perhaps. And perhaps maybe the most important thing is that photographs help to humanize, put a face on the story.
David, what are the 80%, the statistics up there, percentages? 80% of what? What is the numbers?
The number of elements.
80% of what?
Well, the idea of what is processed, of how much of it is actually looked at, or they spend any time at it. And so what they did is they would record the signal to a videotape, and then they would go back and they would count, looked at this picture, looked at this headline, looked at, you know, the...
So 80% of the people looking at that page looked at the artwork?
Right, right.
Okay. So
a visual storyteller will, you know, use visuals to present the information. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they don't want or don't use text at all. That's not true at all. It's more that the text provides a kind of a context and for the meaning of the images. And a visual storyteller knows that photographs are able to portray and evoke emotions, and that I think a visual storyteller has you know, some ethical responsibilities to try to not deceive, either through setting something up that wouldn't happen otherwise, you know, controlling the environment and the situation, or to do it either at the time or after the picture's been made. And that photographers or visual storytellers will use some of the time-honored storytelling techniques about people, how people listen to stories, how people effectively tell stories, that they sort of respect those traditions and try to find ways in which to use visuals as they adopt those techniques. So one of the things I think is really good is to try to create that photography and all of media really, in some ways, tries to create a common experience.
My whole life, I wanted to be in the history books. I'm so passionate about this sport. You know, yeah, there are the stupid people in it who make the sport look bad. The people who are really good, it's all about a sport, just a battle, a fight. It's just a way to challenge yourself. I'm Kevin Crew, and I'm 21, and I'm from Columbia, Missouri. I've been doing MMA for only a little over a year. It's like the only thing I'm really good at and really like. My first fight, August 31st of 07. And after that, Rob picked me up and I started training with him. I train Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Training's pretty rough. Definitely wears down on you after a year. I'm pretty worn out.
He just never gives up. He always keeps trying. He's just turned 21, so he's spunky and got a little bit of attitude, but for his age and everything, he works harder than anybody I've ever seen.
Nobody sees how hard I train. The biggest thing about this sport is it's 90% mental. And that's where I'm the best. I've had some, hard knocks through life, and I've overcome that. I think I beat most of the people I fight mentally. Most of the time, right before the fight, I really don't think about anything because I've been thinking about it so much. I just kind of like clear my mind, Depending on who I'm fighting, I think about my game plan, what I want to do. Rob's like my dad. He tells me that I'm a lot like him when, he was a lot smaller. My dad's missed maybe only one fight. He's really supportive and really into it. My whole family really is. My sister's comes to most of. Every now and then you might have a second where you think about something, but it's all reaction.
Take it down! Go, Crew! He ain't got nothing. You got him. You got him. Put him to sleep.
I was pretty tired from that cut, and I was just really trying to conserve my energy. I was really pressured to win. I was undefeated. I was an amateur. All I could hear was wah, 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 wah. When I came to, I just had to leave. I just had to, get away from everybody. And it was like, that just happened. That just happened. You fall down, you gotta get up, I got caught, and that happens. anything can happen, you know. Anything can happen. I just gotta keep on fighting, keep on training, you know. Yeah.
So this is, good work, Catherine Zolkowski, who was one of our students and who's graduated. And this is, you know, it's a piece that's, it's a little complicated because it's got still photography, it's got a little bit of video in it, it's got audio and text and the use of some more formal research, which is a little bit unusual in a journalistic effort like this too. But I think what Catherine was trying to do was to help us to put us in the same situation so that we would experience it at least to some degree. And so with all these different components, it's a little, it's hard to know sometimes where to start. You know, we and your students see things that they'd like to be able to do, and how do I get going? They want to eat the whole pie, and it doesn't really work that way usually. So we're going to talk a little bit about the toolbox for visual language, and how to create that visual content, and then how you as a teacher can help inspire the creativity, and then some of the other tools like cropping and using words and pictures to work together. So creating that common experience. Just as in writing, we have these things which we're all pretty familiar with, right? We've been doing this since first grade. And yet, the verbal language is so familiar, but the elements of visual writing we're maybe less familiar with. Not that we don't experience it, not that we're not bombarded hundreds, thousands of times a day with visual messages, and not that we're not responding to it, and we do have our own filtering system, and yet we haven't really spent very much time trying to analyze how it's working, why it's working, what makes it effective, things that we should be doing, things we should not be doing, or sometimes to be able to talk about, just as you're able to parse a sentence and say, this is the active verb, this is, you know, the modifiers, and so on. We should be able to do that, the same thing with visuals too. So I think it's also useful, even for the non-photographers, to be able to think about how the visual aspects of life can improve the things that they do as writers, and so that writers are also aware of this. So I guess I'm saying that there are a couple different ways in which this kind of visual awareness, your visual awareness that you encourage in your students, can be useful. One is certainly with the photographers and designers and people who already are so visual that they can't stand it. You know, they squeak when they walk. You know, but then it's also useful, I think, to others who maybe are maybe in a more traditional word mode. And that there are some ways in which some aspects of visual communication that are especially useful, just as we try to create a common experience in that Catherine Zolkowski piece with the music. It was part of the way in which we create the common experience, the black and white tonality of the pictures, getting to know the people by seeing their eyes, moving close, hearing their voice. There are other ways in which we do that with writing. So I think all of us are called really to try to improve our abilities to become more of a visual person, because it makes us more able to understand everything that's working in a given situation, or what it might mean, or how others might perceive it. And so some of it is just being brave enough to say, well, I'm going to try to understand this, even though I'm not exactly sure how it works. And as far as doing journalism, I think one of the important things is to be willing to take this idea of trying to represent an issue that through an individual or through a group of people, rather than feeling like you just going, it's so hard to do that I'm not going to try. Excuse me. If I were to coin money, instead of, I mean, I would probably say, in God we trust on one side, but on the other side, I would say, moments are your friends, or, because I think anything, any photograph, any visual thing that we look at, there's almost always some remarkable moment. And we often think of the moment as being peak action. But some of you, a lot of you probably have heard about Henry Cartier-Bresson and his decisive moment. And you'll see some of his pictures in coffee shops. I don't know if they do them legally or not, but you know, the fellow stepping off almost into the puddle. He's not into the puddle yet, but he might be at any moment. And but a lot of other photographs too, any photograph that you can kind of conjure to your memory, it's an accumulation of things that's about something that's about to happen or something that has happened. So kind of having this idea that we're looking for a moment, not that the whole continuum isn't valid, and it does happen, and we increasingly we're seeing this in video, but we also really register more strongly, react more strongly to a single moment out of that, like the soldiers returning from Vietnam. These are pictures from the POI archive. Lee Harvey Oswald being shot by Jack Ruby. The shuttle explosion. This is a picture by Kim Kamenich, who did his master's here, but this is from his Pulitzer Prize-winning project on the fall of the Marcos regime in the Philippines. And Kim, this was in 1987, and Kim has spent the last several years going back to the Philippines, photographing the people that he had photographed then, and interviewing them, doing some video projects. And we're going to have an exhibit of his work downstairs in RJI, and also across the way in the McDougall Center in the ground floor of Lee Hills Hall. He has this exhibit, a book, and a movie. What's interesting about this picture to me is the sort of the disparate size, you know, the out of proportion statue and the little people on it, and it's actually kind of this is a tribal cleansing, trying to get rid of the Marcos spirit. This is, I think, a good example of a detail by James Noctway, photographing in Iraq, and we have order set up. We have, you know, through the heads with the burqas on, we've got the order set up. Then we have this one piece that's out of order. So this introducing disorder into an ordered situation. There's also a color palette going on where we've got the cool and the dark, and then we have this one more apparent human element going on into it. You guys had lunch, I guess? I think this is not lunch so much as a protecting the young in this case. But looking at things close up, looking at things in a way that we're not used to seeing them, and sometimes I think encouraging people to spend more time with a single subject, planting yourself in one spot, or what did you notice that you found interesting? Well, let's see if we can make a picture that shows that thing that you're talking about, that you understand. How can you make a picture that shows that? This is lunch. A picture by Joel Sartori. And what's not shown here is that it's in Alaska where the grizzlies feed, and there are a lot of other people watching and photographing on the side too. And so sort of choosing to not include that part, but just to include this part. I mean, we're all the time making choices about, what is the story about? Is the story about how this has become a spectator sport, and is, you know, what does the world come to, or is the story about eating? You know, how he gathers his food. This is a picture by a photographer who was on on a weekend date with his wife, and out in the boondocks somewhere. There's this beautiful cottage overlooking this lake, and these gray jays kept making noise. Yes?
Yeah, so that previous picture you talked about how we're always making visual choices, right? Now, more frequently than before, a lot of folks are making those choices after the picture is taken. And can you talk a little bit about the ethics of that? I try to convey to my students that as much as possible, you want to make that choice while you're taking it, and not remove anything, crop anything out afterward, because, well, that's not really the truth anymore.
Well, I have a section on cropping coming up. I don't mind cropping. I think in some ways the whole process of visual communication starts in here, goes through the camera, is downloaded into the computer, and then is fully realized when you output it for the web page. And so I don't, moving along, as you're going along that cycle, that process, I don't necessarily mind making new decisions as long as you're not moving things into a place that they hadn't been before, or making things happen in a way they hadn't before. I'm co-director of the Missouri Photo Workshop. We go to a different small Missouri town every year for the last 64 years. We'll be in Troy, Missouri this year. Anybody from Troy? And we have 40 workshop photographers, and each of the photographers has to come and pitch their story idea for the week to 2 faculty members. They're a team. And they have to be able to articulate what the story is and say what it is they're going to try and photograph, and they have to do that before they make frame 1. And then for the whole week, they have 400 frames. So a lot of people are used to shooting, and then later on figuring out what the story is. I think for students, and photography is, we sort of react to it. I mean, a lot of things oh, that's neat. Oh, cool. Yeah, light, beautiful light. And that is an important part of photography. It's the joy of it in a way, just a found situation. But I think that can be balanced with something that's more deliberate. And so we encourage people to really have an idea what it is that they want to say as a way to have more precise communication, and for them to kind of get inside themselves about what it is that they believe to be true. That's a long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
On my staff, I have my photographers crop and edit their photos before they submit them for use in the yearbook. That way I try to make sure that I've got a photographer's vision as much as they want it to be. And if we decide we want to crop something further, we usually pull the photographer or the photographic editor in while we're doing it to make sure everyone's on the same page about it. Yeah, it's okay to use my photo that way. But most of the time I have the photographer himself do what he wants done to the photo before he can gives it to us.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I think we all learn a lot through the editing process. So while I think it's important that the photographer make the decision finally, it's good also for them to have to be able to justify it. So I don't let anybody off easy. Anyway, this is turning an annoying situation into a nice picture, because with the use of technology and using that pop strobe in order to freeze the moment while also using the available light that shows the beautiful scene. Looking at Don Morelli, a wonderful photographer from Australia, always finds a way to photograph what we've seen so many times before in a fresh way. And he might do this, I don't know, a zillion times, because it's dependent not just on where the diver is, but what happens to the water and exposure, and so it's a lot of photography is really hard work, and it's really kind of understanding what it is you're trying to do. So this idea of being visually literate, everybody talks about what does it mean to be visually literate. If being literate has the ability to read, decode messages in written language, then visual literacy is the same thing with nonverbal or visual messages, especially visual messages. And so this is another thing that I think we encourage people to do, is to try to articulate what it is that the whole story is, not just their one part of it. And I think sometimes at school newspapers or community newspapers, there's the reporter who says, that's my story, and the photographer says, well, that's my picture. Well, let's talk. What is the story? What is it that we understand that we're trying to communicate? And and that, as I said before, that we're kind of taking a risk and trying to really get at what something means, and that we do this representation of issues through individual people. So photographs are supposed to have meaning. Really good photographs usually give us a handhold, a place to get into the picture, and also serve as entry points into a page or a web page or a newspaper page, into a yearbook. And that photographs are not decoration. They're people are looking at them. So what are they going to get out of them? Are they going to only get? Is it going to be saccharine or is it going to be sustenance? So in text journalism, we often are telling. That's not altogether true because we often use direct quotes and we do use visual descriptions to help bring people there and so on. But visual journalism really does have to show, and the photographer has to be there in order to show it. So some of the toolbox elements. Still photographs generally emphasize a specific moment. Sometimes it's a sequence of specific moments, but usually it's, idea is intended at one moment. And more and more photographers are also doing video, and it's often really tough to know, should I be doing video, should I be doing stills? Can I do both at once? And they're torn, going back and forth. And it's not an easy decision often, and often comes people gain experience by making mistakes, as we know. And what we encourage our students, because even in our still photography classes, we're also teaching video and audio and multimedia production. But we often usually come at it from a still photographer's point of view, in that we're trying to emphasize research, developing relationship with the subject or with the environment, having good composition, having good quality of light, making an interesting picture. And once you're able to make that interesting picture in a still photograph, then you can incorporate those skills in doing video. So the visual toolbox would be a single picture. Sometimes it's two still pictures, one played off one another. We know that one idea, black and white played next to each other, is different than just white or black by itself. That we often use multiple still pictures. That found photographs are wonderful. Encouraging photographers to carry their cameras. It's easier to make pictures if you've got your camera with you. Rather than saying, oh, I need to go look for a feature picture. Well, if you carry your camera, you're never looking for a picture. It's always there. It's waiting for you. And also thinking about if there's some ideas or concepts that are difficult, maybe impossible to represent in a still photograph, well, it's no shame to make it a graphic or a map, or think about what is there another visual representation of this concept that is possible. Then also even for them to be able to think about how they might incorporate audio. Maybe it's a single portrait with a little audio clip about what they like. Their favorite food, favorite teacher, favorite subject, how they interpreted the character in a book, whatever. Slideshows, graphics. There are so many different possibilities, and it's really kind of hard to know. And I know that we all have students with varying levels of ability, and some of them you wonder how they manage to get out of bed in the morning, and others are so together that it seems odd to have both in the same class. But often there are ways in which to make that work. I think besides looking at the pictures and saying, how does this work? What's the technique? What did the Sports Illustrated photographer do to make this picture of this Olympic hopeful really good? Thinking about how the photographs how we respond to the photographs in an emotional and psychological way, and yeah. So I'm kind of repeating myself here. So, creating great visual content, we're trying to combine the art of photography and the content of journalism. That's what photojournalism is. And that we have a high standard for our visual images. We've all been trained, conditioned by the mass media, by Hollywood, by pretty much anything. We have very high expectations. We expect it to be well exposed, good saturation, good color, very sharp, delivered to us immediately. We have incredibly high expectations, so that's the aesthetic part. But then we also have really, we do want there to be significant contact. So what photographers can look for are quality of light, kind of thinking about moving closer, long shots, changing their camera angle, thinking about using framing, putting something around the picture, through another person or through a doorway, that kind of framing. Utilizing patterns, looking for graphic composition. And these are sometimes kind of individual assignments or aspects that you ask students to combine a couple different aspects within a single assignment. Or ask them to cover, if it's a photography assignment, a photo class, maybe you ask them to, you've got 8 things, pick 3 and do them in the same picture. Or photograph the same subject with different emphasis on composition in one and with quality of light in another. I think so much about photography is that it really is a solitary sport. I mean, can you teach photography? I don't know. I've been teaching for 25 years. I'm not sure I can teach photography, but I do think just as we do in everything we teach, what we're really doing is encouraging people to be energetic, to be interested, to motivate them, to try to be creative. There are some rules, and we bounce back and say, well, that's spelled wrong, or this is overexposed, or this is out of focus. But the really creative ideas really come from each individual. So I don't think as a teacher you necessarily have to know how to do everything yourself, thank God. But it's good to know, be able to provide a structured framework that you can give some feedback. Some of you have seen this picture before. Yeah, Edward Weston's. He did a whole series of peppers. What do you see? Anybody? What do you see when you look at this picture? A human body. Yeah. 2 people. Yeah. What do you like about the picture? What do you think makes it work? Quality of light, the shadows, texture, shapes. Do you think this is that he was just walking down the hallway from Algebra 1 to sophomore English and saw this pepper and said click and moved on? He went to Schnucks or Safeway or Hy-Vee or wherever he went shopping in California, and he spent a little while looking at these peppers, talking about, thinking about these peppers and what it is he liked. Pick your pepper. One of the interesting things, one of the things we can do, I think, as teachers and as we can do as journalists, is to think about what is the story that we're trying to portray. Who's going to be a good vehicle for telling this story? There are some subjects who are more interesting than others, and that's not to say that. I believe everybody has a story, but not everybody has the same story at the same time. So, pick your pepper and encourage your students to kind of pick your pepper, pick their peppers too. Captions are so important in photojournalism. Wilson Hicks said that the essential unit of photojournalism is a picture and a caption. It's not a picture, it's a picture and a caption. So, the Poynter Institute research I showed earlier showed that the most read item after the photograph itself and the headline is the caption. And it's essential to provide both identity and some context for how to make the picture seem be more meaningful. And in multimedia, as we saw with Catherine Salkowski's piece, captions are often served up as audio, or used as audio captions. So captions provide additional information. It's so annoying, don't you think, when a caption says what the person is doing in the picture? It's a redundancy that is really, well, we don't put up with it in written words. We don't let people say the same thing twice. We say, you've said that once. You may say it more effectively. But we want to have a caption that's meaningful, and we don't want to make stuff up, or the visual ventriloquism or anthropomorphism. The school mascot must be thinking about a win tomorrow night, or come on, So, and the other thing is that photographers are responsible for gathering all caption information and for writing the caption. I know in some circumstances a writer may say, "Oh, I'll take care of that. I'll get all that for you." Don't let them do it. In the real world, they'll have to have it for themselves. And then at the other end of the production phase, encourage designers and people putting together the pages or websites to find out not just what the picture, what the size is of the picture, if it's already been cropped or not, and but also to accommodate the text that's necessary in order to be able to really communicate effectively. Here's an example of an annoying caption. Barack Obama closes his eyes. Yeah, okay. Yep, he did. Yeah, I see him right there. He's got his eyes closed. And then here's another one. This one's maybe a little bit wordy, but you could take the first half or the second half, and either one would be better than the other one. Encouraging photographers to think, what does it mean? And for some people, it's a real reach, but that's why we're doing it. So cropping. We know that cropping is removing non-essential or distracting elements of a photograph, and that sometimes a picture that seems pretty good can be improved with cropping. In some ways, this crop is actually zooming in with the telephoto lens. But we do cropping in order to do it. Why do it? Well, what do we lose if we crop this picture? What we lose is a little bit of a sense of environment about the siding and the rail and the railing that's there, the materials used. But what we gain is really the core of the picture, which already is there, but we're not able to see because of all the distractions. So the core of the picture is really this relationship between the father and who's being deployed and his daughter, and the depth of emotion. So that's, and we start, once we remove some of the distracting elements, this railing and the building in the background, then we start to see other things too, that emotion, but we also see his hand behind her ear. And we see the details that have relevance to what it is we're trying to say. So, so that's why I think, the idea of the photograph isn't really finished until you've looked at it and said, in the old days, and maybe some of you are still teaching with film and paper, and I know we have some of my former students who are teaching high school still use film and paper, and but whenever I was printing in the darkroom, you put the negative in, the enlarger, and turn it on and shine the light onto the easel, and I would say, what do you want to be? Because the process isn't really finished until you've kind of looked at it, and it's both this process, but maybe more importantly, the process for the next time you're out there. The things that you learn about evaluating your images, or incredibly valuable for the next time you're out there making a picture. So here's a needs kid with his swimming coach, and so that's an okay picture, pretty nice. This brings us a little closer into their relationship too. Shows how they're connected and how it was used. This is an accident on I-70. Be very careful out there. It's a dangerous place. And so this is a pretty good picture. It's using a telephoto lens to kind of stack things up. We know we use telephoto lenses in order to bring us closer to situations. We also use telephoto lenses in order to place items in closer proximity. That if you use a wide-angle lens, it tends to separate things. A telephoto lens will bring things into greater physical relationship, apparent physical relationship. So this is one way to handle it. This one's cropped a little bit differently. By cropping it, we're actually cutting off part of the accident, and yet maybe we have a little bit stronger emotional sense of how jumbled it is. So sometimes the cropping experience is an experiment. What if? What does it look like? Let's try it. I want to see what it looks like. Which do you like better? Why do you like this? And this is a great exercise with students too, because they always have an opinion about this one, and they will always do it. This is kind of a tough photographic situation. Peace March through Peace Park. You guys maybe haven't spent much time in Peace Park because it's been 100+ degrees out there, but that's just across the way. And so, what do you think? It's okay? This I thought was a pretty creative crop. We're not seeing all of the sign. We're seeing a little more sense of people and activity. One of the things about photographing signs is that you have to be careful if, in visual communication, if you're having the words do the work, then maybe it just needs to be a caption. That the photograph shouldn't be photographed in words. The photograph should be trying to photograph, to try to portray something else in that scene.
So you could use the cropped version of this photo, and then as a caption you could put "Youth March for Peace."
Yes. Yeah. That's what I would do. Because I find maybe this picture is a little bit, well, I would say it's intriguing. Maybe some would say it's confusing. But, I don't think visuals have to be easy. I think it's okay for them to raise questions and say, well, what's going on here? It makes the reader work a little bit for what they get, rather than saying, yeah. Because it's boring. It's just boring. You've got too many bushes. It's centered composition. It has a center of interest, but there's nothing there. We don't have any sense of depth. By cropping it, all of a sudden we do have a sense of depth. We are kind of raising an issue. This is from a German fans watching a German soccer, and then it's not exactly the same picture, but the idea, same situation. So we're coming into it, just being more specific. So the other thing is that as we're presenting the images, besides cropping, you might image size sometimes has a real impact on how much we connect with someone. So doing tight portraits sometimes can be very effective. It helps to simplify the background. Whenever you move closer with the camera, you're simplifying the background because there's going to be less depth of field. You're removing distracting elements. This chess player's thinking hard. Very nice. This is a pretty well-known picture, the Marlboro Marine. Some of you probably have seen it on Media Storm or the LA Times. So you also have to be careful when we're cropping, not to get too crazy about, not to crop things that don't need cropping. This, for instance, is a picture that, what's going on in this image? Pardon me? It's a flood? Okay, we know that it's a flood. We think it's a flood because we got the furniture piled in the canoe. This maybe helps us know a little bit more because we're also seeing the water level. being different from what it normally would be. Yeah, we know that then we see it's a road. Nice portrait. Nice portrait of this guy, not bad. This is more interesting because it turns out that he's an architect in Chicago, and that's the environment that he works in. He works in the land of buildings, and so by doing that, it's an okay portrait. We see what he looks like, but that's not entirely the object of the picture. We would like to have more. Cute, C-U-T-E, even C-U-T-E, or I mean, we know that she got caught somehow, but we didn't know for sure that it was fishing, but now we know. So. They won. We think they won. Oh, and they lost. So, sometimes, you want to be as specific as you can, but also being able to have the context that helps us to understand the emotion is terribly important. Mount Rushmore, any of you passing through there? So we know that this is neat. It's okay just to be able to see the stone close up in the fence, but by having the humans in it, we see a little, have a stronger sense of scale. Hey, Al. Oh, yes. Very nice. These are prisoners at Guantanamo, and so we can't show soldiers, but we can have the sense of soldiers being present. Ooh, you had lunch, I forgot. So try to be, I think it's great that the photographer gets to decide exactly what the crop is in a picture at Jenny's shop, which is fantastic. I think always we need to try to be sensitive and try to have the photographer explain what it is that they like about a picture, whereas we're working with them being able to try to articulate the things that we think we like. So this is an example of a picture that could be cropped, from the Vietnam Memorial, but why you maybe wouldn't want to crop it, because it has a little bit more of a sense of depth, of timelessness, of enormity of names, of lots of different ways in which to express the idea, and that it's neat to see the kid's face and know that he's doing a balloon, but the whole idea of doing balloon of the bubbles is what it feels like to be and also this is a more interesting picture in terms of composition. Why? It's the whole photo, the whole flow. Using the rule of thirds, crop any image into, slice any image vertically and horizontally into thirds, and wherever we have those intersection points is a natural center of interest. So this is working with that idea rather than fighting against it. Dropping fire retardant in the Southern California forest fire. This kid's fishing, but this is fishing. That's why people fish. So, readability. Can you see that? Is it? Can you see it? Yeah? Sometimes readability is not just about being able to see it, but for the picture to have any sense of impact, to really see it. And so sometimes it's important to kind of think about trying to, instead of using 2 or 3 pictures smaller, using 1 picture bigger. Really think about what the impact can do. Often, we're working on deadlines, all kinds of deadlines, or maybe it's class exercises or whatever, but you also have the opportunity to experiment. And if you want people to pay attention to your publications, visuals are a tremendous way in which to do that, because they will pay attention. Hello. So how do you make a good picture? The essential thing is to remember that a camera is not as smart as you are. It's not even as smart as your students. Yeah. Well, the camera just sees whatever it's pointed at, and then I can look here and I can say I'm only going to look at Van. I can stand way back here and then still only see Van. But if I'm a camera, then in order to really only see Van, I am like this. So the brain is such an efficient machine that it can really eliminate things and emphasize things. So moving closer, that's such a simple, obvious thing to do, but it's so essential. And to have an idea about what is it you're trying to say, and maybe having your students articulate what it is that you're trying to do with this picture, with a person or a chair or whatever it is, and then to consider the various other visual language components, composition, quality of light, and environment, and that they work to solve the technical difficulties. And sometimes it's hard because they're working with a camera that's more complicated than they have experience to handle, or they're using it in the wrong mode, or they think they know how to do it, or they think that M means manly, so they don't want to go to automatic aperture priority or whatever. I often think that if you're able to simplify the technical aspects of making pictures and just really have them concentrate on the content, that once they do that, then you can go back and work on refining some of the technical things. Aaron?
Do you find, you said you've been teaching photography for a while, so do you find nowadays, because I get kids in my photo class who take pictures, they already take pictures of everything, their food, at least 20 pictures of themselves every day, and they're never thinking about what they're taking pictures of. So do you find you have to teach things like composition differently now than maybe 10 years ago?
I don't think you have to teach it differently. What would you like them to be able to do? What would be?
I want them to think. To be more specific. Yeah, I want them to, because they don't, when I give them a photo assignment, they think that they go out and take 5 pictures of the same thing and just point at it and look, I'm done, that's what they do with their friends and, their makeup pictures and their food pictures and whatnot. So I have a hard time getting them to think in a storytelling sense, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, let's brainstorm. What ideas? What kind of a photo assignment could we give Aaron's class to bother them, to really make them itch?
Well, I don't have that solution, but I was just thinking back to the Maestro proposal, the Maestro system. I never used it. I don't know about it, but if the kids have to sit down in a group for half a class period and come up with a fake spread of what they want it to look like, and then the photographer has to go out and meet those kinds of requirements, that might help.
Yeah, I think so, along those same lines. Every time for my photography, my photojournalism students, before I hand out an assignment, I just show them examples of stuff that's already been done. So this is macro photography. These are, we spend a whole class period doing just what you're showing us now, looking at examples of macro photography. If you want to steal this idea, feel free, but at least that gives them a specific target to be looking for.
I was actually sort of just brainstorming when we were talking earlier, and with my actual newspaper journalists, same kind of thing. I'm gonna go take a picture of the soccer game, and not really thinking about the different ways that you can portray the soccer game, the winning, the losing, the fun, the sadness, whatever. But actually, maybe instead, or not every assignment, but maybe one assignment, teach them the different principles, or pick one principle and say, of all of the 5 pictures that you need to take with this issue, one of these pictures, I want you to do a close-up tight shot. And so that way you're not totally taking away all their creativity and their ability to try and practice, but just giving them some guidance to This is what you should be doing, and just
Like
try it once.
a kind of rubric, yeah. Allie?
I had my kids do, I don't know if you've ever seen at craft shows, they have like photographs that are letters.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, I had my kids do that, and I made them at least look for things that they would have normally seen, and it had to have a whole theme and all that stuff.
I did it at the end of the year. I think that's what
Can you explain?
It's, okay, so let's say, see how that creates an A, and if you flip it over, it creates a B? They would take a picture of that, and then their whole theme would be maybe like ceilings. And so they would have to find A through Z in ceilings. And they would have to put it together, and let them put it together however they wanted to.
Or you might take a color, and each student would have to do an essay on a color. You know, yellow, but it can't be, you know, trying to find different ways, you know, some sort of conceptual thing where they do have to kind of think. I'm sorry, Alyssa?
Okay, you guys might laugh at me, but there's a part of America's Next Top Model where they critique the photography, and it actually is really, really helpful, that section, because they take each photo and they talk about the positioning and what they like, and they talk about shading. And for kids that are maybe like just taking, their first subject is themselves, right? Because they're completely self-centered, because that's their psychological developmental stage. So when they look at photos of a person, like they really can identify with that. And when they look at the critique of those photos, they start to kind of be able to apply it to the photos that they take of people, and then kind of branch from there.
Interesting.
Well, I'll have my students take pictures of things that there's something missing. There's something that should be there that's not. For example, you know, if there's the trees out there and if there's a limb that's missing, what I'm asking you to do is to find imperfection. Because I don't want a photograph of perfection. And I took 3 years of photography in Nebraska, but not you. But my professors, you know, he didn't want perfection. He wanted things that were slightly out of order, things that were missing, to teach us how to look for not only what's there, but what's not.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
Now for my film class, one of the things we do is make up storyboards, and like graphic novels, how you do a scene. And that helps you up there, tell you who the actor just get their scene out. That's where the work comes in, and they go put together something.
I know some of you are teaching photojournalism, you know, where we're not manipulating, we're going out and reporting with a camera. Others are teaching a different kind of photography class that's more creative, where you can make up whatever you want to. And I think it's a challenge, but I think that there are lots of ways in which to make students slightly uncomfortable. And I think the more of that, the better. One of the things I do with students is the very first assignment is called Pockets. Pockets assignment, where they have to approach, go out downtown and approach a couple people and see what they've got in their pocket, and just make a picture of their hand, that person's hand, and what's in their pocket. And we do that. It's remarkable what people carry in their pockets. It's remarkable how sometimes the hardest thing about making a picture is being able to approach a stranger. Or maybe it's not a stranger because you've seen them every day for the last 4 years in school, but you can never, you know, bring yourself to talk to them. But just doing that kind of detail, and what do we learn from that? Another assignment I do, the second assignment in the Fundamentals of Photojournalism class, is that they have to go take pictures. They have to meet 10 people, do tight portraits, and do a 1-paragraph story that's based on quotes, direct quotes from them. And I'm working with, you know, well, some second semester freshmen, but mostly they're juniors and seniors and a few grad students. They find it, they're frightened to death. So what you could do that would really help me, if any of your students ever come to Missouri, is to work through this now. I mean, the hardest thing about being, I think, and for many people, the hardest part about being a photographer is actually being able to talk to people. And so we talk about how to approach people and sort of opening lines, how you share something about yourself, how you are not representing. If they turn you down, it's not because they hate you, it's because they just don't want to have their picture made at the time, and where you might be, what kind of backgrounds you would use, what kind of light situation you're in. But I think that really impedes the development of more photographers than anything else. It's a kind of, they're very creative, they love looking at the world, but they're really shy, and they don't know how to get through it. And so, we can't do anxiety counseling necessarily, but we can find ways in which, give some handholds, some tools about this is how you might consider doing it. And maybe they start with people that they've done, and to make a very simple kind of picture. You say they're making pictures of themselves. Are they doing self-portraits?
You could call them that. Their Facebook profile.
Okay. Well, self-portrait, how about a self-portrait that you would like your minister to see? How about a self-portrait that you want your, Aunt Tallulah, Idaho to see? How about a self-portrait that you want your friends to see? Just the different ways in which they see themselves and how they would, I think that could be kind of interesting too. And a lot of photographers have done self-portraits, and it's almost the most interesting work if they really are doing a self-portrait, because it's so revealing and kind of tough.